Okay, hello everybody and welcome back. Hope everyone had a nice coffee. We have two talks in this session before lunch, and the first is by Valdi Ingthorsson from the University of Helsinki, who will be talking about convergence towards the truth, about the truth, a case study. Over to you, Valdi.
Yes, thank you. So I'm going to present an analysis of what's going on in the dispute about truth. One that is in a way building on what Richard Kirkham said about it already in 1992, and in all the kind of entries on truth in the Stanford Encyclopedia, it's now being recognized in the entry on the pragmatic theory of truth. But I'm expanding on Kirkham's analysis a little bit, and which I think explains why philosophy, or at least explains to some degree, why philosophy had a difficult time converging towards a consensus on what's the best solution to issues. I say truth here, but it's really about inferring to some kind of best explanation, really. Okay. And I want to show that once we've understood what, in a way, this feature is, what's going on, it changes the prospect for maybe coming to some agreement about what's the best answer here. Okay. Maybe more about finding out where the real disagreement is. I don't think the disagreement really is so much in the content of theories, but rather what they presuppose about what it is that they're offering explanations to. Right? I think that's the main confusion going on here. So if we begin with a popular view of what the dispute is about, it's typically presented as in the form of different views offering different explanations to something, in this case, truth. But as Richard Kirkham originally points out, it seems that it is difficult to understand these different theories, or at least most of them, as trying even to offer an explanation to the same thing. So rather, there appears to be different sorts of projects that people are committed to, and they have varying histories, and the origins of some of them are basically forgotten about, or more or less. And one of the more popular one is to think that to offer a theory of truth is to offer a theory of the truth predicate, of how it's used in language, natural language in particular. It's a project that became popular with the linguistic turn, when philosophers were widely skeptical to the prospect of philosophy being able to say anything about reality, whatever that was, therefore couldn't really say anything about how we would know about reality, and even couldn't really address directly the contents of our minds, because that's not intersubjectively available. Should be good empiricists. So like A has suggested, all we can do really is to look at the way words are used, and from the data we get, infer something about its function, and then possibly indirectly say something about what the concept that seems to govern our use of the words. Richard Kirkham calls this the Speech Act project. I call it just a linguistic project. If we engage in this kind of thing, what we have to do is to do a little bit of empirical linguistics, look at the way we actually use words, and then draw certain inferences from that. And what philosophers invariably find, because it's just a fact about natural language, is that we use it in various ways. So if I say, Seymour is a true friend, I'm not saying he corresponds to reality or that he's coherent or useful, although he could be both. And I don't say it's identical to a friend. I'm just saying he really is a friend, right? And that illustrates the point of the so-called redundancy thesis. It seems I'm just asserting a fact, really, and the is true becomes redundant. Don't use it. It's a redundancy thesis, and that gives really a rise to the idea that of the deflationary thesis, there is no property, or at least on the basis of the way we use words, we don't seem to attribute the property of correspondence or coherence or something like that. Okay? And that's really the story then that I'm offering here of deflationism. And then I think it's best to understand pluralism as a response to that. They're actually just saying, well, no, it's not we shouldn't draw the conclusion that there is no way to be true. There are many ways to be true. But then they have to offer an explanation as to why the many ways are different species of the same genus. That's what they're struggling with today. Now then, there is what Kirkham calls a justification problem. I call it the epistemic project. And here the focus is really on the question, how do we know that P is true? That seems to many people to be the primary question. And what's really true, perhaps, isn't that important. And, of course, most epistemologists engage in that project. How do we know, right? But they don't, I would say, with rare exceptions, think that this is ultimately a question about truth. It's about how we know. But if you end up endorsing an epistemic theory, you have typically started from this end of the spectrum, so to speak. But as I will show, if we try to equate truth and how do we know, there are certain problems that arise from that. But the unit of analysis is different. Before we were looking at the way we use words, now we're looking at justificatory practices. That's a different thing, isn't it? And then we have something called, what I call the conceptual project. This is not a part of Kirkham's analysis, maybe because it's not clear that if we take this project, we end up favoring one or other theory of truth. We could end up any theory depending on other assumptions that we make. But I think this is important in light of the broader, I think, understanding of what our philosophers doing in general. Right? And that's based just on the very popular belief that philosophy is conceptual analysis. Right? That's what we do. And on many levels, that's very true, I think. Okay? It's just that we don't agree what concepts are, where they are, and therefore we don't agree on how to go about analyzing them, or even if it's correct to call what we do analysis rather than construction. Maybe we're just gradually trying to improve on concepts that we create to understand some phenomena, right? And there are mainly two schools of thought. It's the more Platonic view, where truth disappears in the distance there. No, it's there. I'm seeing the picture of myself on the screen. Yeah, so here the idea is that concepts really come as already existing and finished products that have a certain fixed content. We're just confused about it. The assumption is often to be, at least, that we have some access to them, so really in the back of our minds, we have the concepts, we're just confused about it. And the way to go is a priori analysis. Empirical research, not that interesting because that's not where our subject matter is, or at least only indirectly relevant. Okay? But if you don't think that concepts come like these ready-made entities, you think that they are what we construe our best attempts yet to understand the phenomenon, then of course it isn't the concept that is the unit of analysis, it's the phenomenon. And typically we will single out the relation between the contents of thought and some phenomenon in the world that it's about, which is not a word or a concept, it's a phenomenon, right? Now what we have here now is that different theories seem to be easily understood as being about not all of the same, addressing the same unit of analysis, but different units of analysis. And in fact, I don't think we have just 4. I think we have 5 different units of analysis because people looking at truth in logic are looking at a different way to use the word truth. Right? And I'm going to ignore that aspect of the issue here. I don't know enough about it. Now, for me, the point isn't that, well, we need to find out the correct unit of analysis. No, all of these units of analysis are interesting subjects for metaphysics or philosophy generally. And the answers we can give to all of these questions will be interesting. The problem is that we seem to be discussing as if we're not talking about different things, but the same thing all the time. Right? So better to understand what is a theory trying to offer an explanation to. And here, if we do that, analyze the theories in that way, I think the scenery changes. So we get something like this instead. There are conflicting theories about what the phenomenon is, what is truth as a phenomenon. There are conflicting theories about how do we know that something is true. And there seems to be a range of theories about the function of the truth predicate, although the question is, of course, do they really contradict each other? Okay. And then there are, and if we analyze the theories in terms of what is the unit of analysis, it turns out there isn't just one but 2 coherence theories, one about the phenomenon, the other about how we know. There are at least 3 identity theories, 2 about the phenomenon and one, I don't know what it's about really, I have to admit. It's the theory of McDowell and Dodd and Hornsby and maybe Truman, because they want to stay ontologically neutral. They don't want to take a stand on the realist-anti-realist dispute. And they're not really telling us what the proposition, what is really identical to what in their theory. So it's very difficult to understand what it is they're saying. And that's, I think, the consensus among commentators, that it's really difficult to see what they're saying. And that's why I'm going to simplify and remove them from the stage. They don't seem to be a strong contender until someone maybe clarifies it a little bit better. Minimalism also an odd one out because it doesn't deny that things are true by corresponding to reality. It doesn't offer really a function of the word. It just remains skeptical about the prospects of a theory of truth and thinks that all we can know about it are the instances of the T-schema. Now, I find that implausible, but just for the sake of this talk, at least, I'm removing it from the stage here. You can ask about it in the Q&A. So we possibly have three different distinct disputes about different units of analysis. And if we look at them in turn, then in the metaphysical corner we have the correspondence theory, as I said, when the contents of thought seem to capture something correctly about its subject matter, we think it's true. And on this view, truth is not a word, although it's good to have a word for it, and traditionally we have been using truth for that relation for a long time. And it's not a concept, although the correspondence theory could be a representation of the concept that some people have at least. And it doesn't tell us how we know. It doesn't tell us how we know something is true, but it seems to specify what the problem is. And that's maybe why it's so difficult to get rid of it. If we say nothing corresponds to reality, then we have to worry, well, what's so difficult about knowing stuff? What is that we're supposed to know? But it does have competitors, and to begin with, there is the realist identity theory of Russell and Moore, who admitted there is an external material reality, but sometimes maybe the constituents of that reality become the constituents of the propositions we think, and then what we talk of as truth is really an identity rather than correspondence. But they themselves abandoned that theory for reasons we don't have to go into now. I don't think there's any defenders of this view anymore. And then we have the identity theory of Bradley, and he, as an idealist, says, well, there is no external material reality, but there is a complete whole of ideal entities, and some of these identities are true, others are false, and they seem just to be primitively true and false. And when what we think, the content of what we think is identical to one of these true propositions, our thought is true. That seems to be the idea. And again, we have a theory that I wouldn't be able to name a defender of that theory today, although possibly McDowell's and Dodd's theory seems to be maybe in the vicinity of this, right? And then we have the idealist coherence theory of Joachim. Again, he's an idealist, thinks that reality made up of this complete and perfect whole of ideal entities, no corresponds to an external reality, and the relationships between the entities are ideal or conceptual rather than physical, of course. Since it has to be perfect, there can't be contradictions, and everything has to be linked up, because if something isn't linked up, it's not a part of the whole, and then we don't have a complete whole. Okay? And again, this is the theory I think we can understand what he's saying, but it is an ontological theory, not based on how we use the truth predicate, or how we think, or any questions about really how we know, although it could have implications for that in the idealist world. But unless you are an idealist, you don't have much business believing in this theory, and as far as I know, no one endorses this view anymore. So it seems that there is a clear winner in the metaphysics corner today. This is the one that seems to be a genuine contender still, the correspondence theory. About 50% of the philosophical community endorses that theory, according to the Phil Paper survey. And then we have the how do we know question, and the main contenders there have been the coherence and the pragmatic theory. But the criticism against these theories have always been really that they're too implausible to take seriously. And I'm paraphrasing, I'm not saying this myself, I'm paraphrasing what Russell, Arthur Papp, Horowitz, Dorothy Emmett, Eric Olson have said about it. But they are judging these theories on the basis of what they offer a theory of the phenomenon. They're not judging them as theories, for instance, about what they might really be about, not really what role does the concept of truth play in our epistemic practices, okay? And as such, I would say I'm very much a pragmatic theorist as myself, or at least very sympathetic to it. So really the argument has been that coherence on its own isn't really a reliable indicator of truth, and then it's even a worse candidate for what constitutes truth, although it may well be a significant part of how we justify our beliefs about reality. Same for the is true or functionality, is utility or success a reliable indicator? No. Is it then a likely candidate for what constitutes truth? No. Even though the pragmatic approach might come closest to what describes our pragmatic practices or epistemic practices. Sorry. So as answers to a different question than the what is truth, they're perfectly plausible. And now, even though I think today there isn't, these two theories aren't that popular. There is still, I think, a lot of people who hold on to this idea that truth and justification is very much connected, and also endorsed by realists. This is Damien Cox saying that these theories are grounded in the intuition, and now I can't spell the same here, intuition that one ascribes truth to a proposition when it's primarily signaling that the proposition ought to be believed, and the ought is epistemic rather than pragmatic or axiological. It's not a normative question there in that sense. And that seems to me to be an intuition that what we're trying to explain is the use of the truth predicate. And as it turns out, he's not really talking at all about what it is that could warrant our belief that something is true. It's only about what it is that we're doing when we ascribe truth to something, right? So he says, therefore, it's the epistemic normative role of truth description rather than, say, correspondence to an ontologically given fact that supplies the substance of our concepts of truth. And that seems to comply with the description I gave of deflationism, really. We look at the use of words and we derive that from a function or a function of the word, but only here in specific circumstances, not when we're making epistemic claims. And then that tells us something about the concept that we use, okay? And this doesn't seem to be at all about how we even justify these claims, okay? And I think we can take a test to see if we're epistemic theorists. If you think that P is true because truth is attributed to it, does anything become true because we say it's true? Or can we be justified in holding false beliefs? And if the answers are no and yes, then I don't think you are an epistemic theorist. You think truth is something else. So, my analysis here of the how we know corner is that these theories are, I think, a part of what we're really asking about. How do we know? And the question is, what warrant for belief is the best, or what combination of warrants for belief could be the one that clinches it? But those don't seem to be answers to the what is truth, right? Even though they could have, or at least what is truth has an implication for what you think about these warrants, okay? So I think the judgment should be that this is basically just epistemology and isn't really what is truth answers, really. But they are answers to the how do we know question. Okay. If we now look to the function of truth corner, or forgot to say that one of these, the epistemic theory in the general, actually seems to then be a theory about the function of the word true, right, in particular contexts, okay? And it seems to be a certain kind of epistemic virtue signaling, isn't it, right? You should believe this, it's true, right? And we see other kinds of uses, this is truly delicious, this is truly surreal, right? In all these different domains of discourse, aesthetics, morality, and so on. We use the word true to signal a certain virtue. The question is then, does that mean that we can infer from that we have a particular concept of truth, which is the ethical or aesthetic or something concept? Okay, so we have the various suggestions about functions, and let's see, deflationism says that traditional theories are mistaken in thinking there's a property, and they think that the only intelligible question to ask and answer is about the function of the word true. And they think, of course, that the mistake comes from what happens when we look at the function. Okay? And that seems to me to be a little bit circular. You've already decided that all we can ask and answer is about the function. Turns out it doesn't seem to be about the attribution of a property, therefore there is no property. And although deflations today, I don't see a lot of kind of clear anti-metaphysical arguments. The origins had that kind of, the origin of the project had that kind of taint. Philosophy can't tell us anything about the world, so the only thing we can do is say something about the function of the word. And I think there's also a little bit of a defeatist there, right? We haven't seen consensus for a long time. Let's give this up. Let's do something different. And that's how it's presented in the Stanford Encyclopedia. It's a different approach to the issue. And yes, it is. And it's pursuing a perfectly good project. Yeah, what is the function of the truth predicate? Okay. But if we look at the functions that people arrive at, and in addition to the kind of epistemic or this virtue signaling that I mentioned, we have disquotationalism saying it's a device for disquotation. The earth is round is true, the same as the earth is round. And yeah, I'm sure we use the word in that way. In many times we do that, okay? But is that to the exclusion of other functions? I'm not so convinced about that. Pro-sententialists say it's a pro-sentence form and operator. When someone says there are people on Mars and someone says that is true, is true here functions as a pro-sentence. Yeah, we're in favor of this proposition. And yeah, I think that's a function of the word in natural languages. We often use it in that way. Again, is that the only function to the exclusion of others? And I don't think so. And in fact, there's an interesting set of anomalies. And that's claims where we are very explicitly talking, not about the fact the proposition is about, but about the proposition, such as, my conjecture is true. It's very difficult to disquote that. So, my conjecture, well, what about it, right? Or the theory of relativity is true, and someone says, that is true. How do we deal with that? Are we saying the theory of relativity, we're in favor of that? And that doesn't seem to be a complete sentence. Rather, it's we're in favor of it being true. And that means that is true in the first instance is different from the is true in the pro-sentence, right? They're not both pro-sentence forming operators. And the reason is, I think, that the only way to understand the theory of relativity is true is that we think that it describes reality. It corresponds to reality. Okay? So the only use it seems not to be that we can't treat in a disquotational or pro-sentential form or way is when we are explicitly saying that something corresponds. So it's one of the non-reducible uses of is true. So pluralism then, and here the pluralism starts from the observation, they say, that different theories of truth are popular in different domains. And I have to admit that I think that is wrong, just factually wrong, and they haven't checked. If you look at the surveys about what people think, yeah, 50% of the philosophical community believe in the correspondence theory, and the other have very little following. Right? But they're not split, according to domains of discourse, that's true. So if we look at how they motivate that judgment that different theories are correct in different domains, what they point to is the use of words. Right? In some domains we use words like, this is really truly surreal, this is truly delicious, this is truly wrong, okay? And they infer from that the people who are using those expressions believe in a particular theory of truth, right? That they have an advanced theory of truth, rather than just using words in the way that we do in natural languages, in all kinds of ways. We're virtue signaling, okay? So I think that's a better explanation to the why different expressions are popular in different domains. But let's say there's some truth in this, different ways of being true possibly. How do we explain that? Why are they different species of the same genus? And one of the latest explanations I've found is that, well, there could be many ways of corresponding. But yeah, I'm fine with that. That means that the theory collapses into the correspondence theory. Another claim has been that it's really about making valid claims. We're making claims in different domains about aesthetics, about morality, and so on, and we want these claims to be valid, and that we say they're true. But that, again, can be interpreted as this virtue signaling, right? Do we really want to think that truth is validity? And I find that there are plenty of problems there. First of all, as far as I know, there is no theory of truth as validity. So what about the claim that the observation was that different theories are true in different domains? And when they're explaining that by appealing to theory, it doesn't exist, or at least that they're making up now on the spot. So it doesn't seem to generalize to all domains. And do we want truth and validity to collapse? It doesn't seem to me. We're making a distinction between valid inference because something follows from premises, and it doesn't matter whether the premises are true or false, but if they are true, the reasoning is sound. If they are false, it's unsound. Right? So we make that distinction by making a distinction between truth and validity. If we collapse the distinction, we can't say what's sound and unsound. And finally, there's the idea that truth is multiply realized, which has been defended in a PhD thesis here in Finland recently. And I mean, it seems conceptually possible, just like it's conceptually possible that there are philosophical zombies, but I'm not seeing it really kind of offering a novel and fruitful explanation that goes beyond, for instance, just accepting that truth is correspondence, and there could be possibly many ways of corresponding. So it seems to be more introducing maybe a novel puzzle rather than solving the puzzles that we already have. Okay. And what I have to say is, of course, that everything or nothing of what I've said provides a knockdown argument. But I'm hoping that it kind of changes the scenery of what we're trying to evaluate so that it's not clear, at least, that there is any other genuine disagreement than, well, what should be the unit of analysis, right? And we can resolve that dispute by saying, well, there are many interesting units of analysis to go for. do your thing, right? So I would say that in the function of truth corner, everyone's a winner. Yeah, they have identified, I think, lots of different functions of the word true. But it doesn't seem that any of these theories or suggestions about the function of the word true have any implications whatsoever as to whether thoughts correspond to reality and whether that relation has any role to play in our epistemic practices. Okay? So it seems to be basically an unrelated matter here about how we use words. And we do use words in various ways. We say that a desert is dry because there's no water. We say wine is dry because there's no sugar, plenty of water. Humor is dry because it hasn't got an emotion. And we wouldn't say, oh, then there's no way of being dry, really. There's just, or many ways of being dry. Rather, we'd say there is one way of being dry, and then there are metaphorical uses of the word dry. So that's my take on that approach. So is there a consensus to be had? Well, it seems at least we can say that different theories of truth are arguably answers to different questions. They're addressing different units of analysis, and the main ones may be how our beliefs relate to reality, how do we know whether they relate to reality, and then how do we use the word true, and we get different answers if we're looking for natural language or formal language. They're supposed to be related, but of course we have no control over natural language. It has a life of its own, right? So at least that seems to be an issue that might not have so many philosophical implications for the other dispute. The knowledge, how do we know, and what is truth, they are intimately related and difficult, I think, to give one answer to one without relating to the other. So that's my suggestion. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Valdi. We have about 14 minutes for questions. Please keep your hands up until I nod at you. We'll start there.
Thank you. I'm just going to be a bit of a disquotationalist right now. Is that okay?
Yeah, okay.
I'm not normally, but today I am. And I felt that your discussion was a bit like an argument from caricature.
Yeah, okay.
Because you had two examples there.
Yeah.
The earth is round is true equals the earth is round. Then you had my conjecture is true equal my conjecture?
Oh.
Right. But your first example, there was nothing to disquote. You forgot the disquotational marks. Right. Then it becomes about the proposition. In the other example, my conjecture is a name. Right? A name for something, the conjecture. So you're not supposed to replace, just remove is true. You're supposed to spell out the content of my conjecture, which is, for example, that 1 + 1 is 2. I don't know what your conjecture is right now. But the point is you replace my conjecture with the conjecture, not my conjecture. Right? You need to disquote.
Yeah.
So it's a kind of like you need to... And then it becomes very easy to discuss negatively when you ignore crucial elements to it. But I mean, I agree with your conclusion still, like in the end. But the path also matters.
Yeah, and of course, when you're trying to pack in this big picture scenario into 30 minutes, it becomes a parody, right? It's perfectly true, right? And yes, there are questions to be raised about it. The example, my conjecture, is given in the Stanford Lane Encyclopedia as one of the problems, and they don't unpack it, like I haven't unpacked it, right? And of course, yes, the other could be. So these are examples of, let's say, possible anomalies. But I think my main argument is that whatever, even if we give the disquotational analysis, it wouldn't have these implications for the, what is truth and the epistemic problem anyway, right? And it maybe doesn't capture the uses of truth in this aesthetic and Q&A, other domains that, arguably are not in these philosophical domains. It's rather in ordinary life domains. Okay. Would that, in a way, satisfy you? That? Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Hi. Thanks for the talk. So I was trying to figure out whether there's a way in which one could defend the claim in the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. So the only legitimate way to study truth is to understand what the function of truth is, because we don't investigate facts in the world. And you say at the end that there is no agreement on what this function would be. So in that case, there would be no convergence, and we have a plurality of theories and nothing that unifies them. But in the penultimate slide, I think, you mentioned that the possibility that truth could be multiply instantiated, right? Multiply realized.
Yeah.
So perhaps there is no agreement on, say, the low-level function of truth, but just because people haven't bothered to study the high-level function of truth, namely the thing that is being realized and that unifies them, and that could very well be correspondence. So perhaps there is one thing after all.
Yeah,
and that could be understood in terms of function again, even though people don't agree about function.
Yeah, I mean, I could. I have a certain sympathy for pursuing the multiple realization project. But it seems to me to be in a starting point, so to speak. And if I were to guess beforehand, I would kind of guess that it will enter the same kind of difficulties as pluralism generally gets. But I'm guessing then. Okay. So with that respect, I will have to say that this is more like an assessment of, okay, how does it look now? And if something happens with the development of the idea that the truth is multiply realized, yeah, I'll reconsider. Right? Let's see. Okay. So, but I'm arguing really that I think we're doing too little of this to take this holistic approach to the whole issue, trying to understand all the theories, and not just looking at what they're saying, but also, well, what are the kind of methodological assumptions that are built into the very approach that people take? And that's originally is Kirkham's suggestions. Let's not just take the theory and assume that they're all talking about the same thing. Let's look at what seems to be their methodological approach. But as I think have been noted by several people, that we're bad at noting these meta-philosophical assumptions. So it becomes very difficult to know what a philosopher takes themselves to be explaining, right? And maybe that's the main point for me, right? So yes, and again, I don't think that the multiple approach, not just in terms of multiple realization, but generally, is good. They're going to come to something that will add something to the whole debate, but let's keep the big picture also in the back of our minds. That's maybe the message. Yeah.
Thanks for the talk. So here's my worry. I don't see what work the metaphysical bit does, because I can see what work the bit about the uses of truth does. Well, it tells us how it's being used, maybe even how we should use it, stuff like that. Yeah. I see what the epistemic stuff does, the epistemology bit. It tells us what kinds of beliefs we should form and stuff like that. Yeah. But as you yourself pointed out, the coherentist way, the pragmatic way, they do not guarantee truth. They are not sort of in that way. They might be truth indicative, but they're not truth guaranteeing. So they're fallibilistic. These, and then what work does saying, well, something is true if it corresponds to reality, when we never get at truth as it happens. Yeah. So it sort of seems like it's just a thing that stands there idly by. And with Wittgenstein, I would then say if it's a part of a mechanism that doesn't touch any other bit of the mechanism, then we should just not really even talk about it.
Yeah. Yeah, good question. And that's what's been worrying me too, because you could take this, what I'm arguing here, as a kind of deflationism, but of a different kind. Notably, to point out actually the correspondence theory isn't doing too much work, right? It doesn't explain to us how we know, just postulates this relation. And I think the only thing really in favor of it is what happens when we remove it. the assumption of this relation. So if the pragmatist says, look, all we can do is just find out what works, yeah, then I think they don't have an answer, yeah, why did it work? Unless they say, because it somehow captures something about reality, okay? And that might be the best way to capture something about reality. So it seems to me that truth at least works as a certain kind of regulatory principle, and maybe not as anything more than that. So I'm tempted to think that truth is actually considered too highly. I mean, the idea in philosophy is that everything has to be specified in terms of truth values, for instance, or truth conditions, rather. Okay, I'm not so sure about that. I think that can lead to bad consequences, right? So both saying, well, don't confuse these ideas, but also it might shed a light on correspondence theory, not really saying anything really too important. Okay, but it's really difficult to get rid of it. Yeah.
Thanks. I already reported. My question was essentially asked by the gentleman here, so I'll pass it on for the next topic. Okay. Thank you.
Thanks.
Right. Okay. Thanks a lot. I have 2 points. One comment. I think you gave too easy a ride to the correspondence theory. You went through problems with the idealist theory or coherence theory, but then, if I got you right, or maybe I missed something, you just said that most of philosophers tend to commit to the correspondence theory. But of course, it's a highly problematical theory itself as well. You didn't cite any of those. So I'm not sure if it can be the winner, or then if it's a winner, then it's winner by reference to the consensus. And then another point, I like the conclusion nevertheless, but then the suggestion would be, isn't that kind of a meta-functionalist conclusion? So actually you are studying the functions of theories of truth. So actually it points towards the functionalism in a way.
I like that suggestion, and yes, I definitely skipped over plenty of the problems with the correspondence theory. What even is correspondence? Okay, and there's I don't think there's an answer to that as present. But so this talk is in a way perhaps pitched in the sense that there is so much criticism of the correspondence theory. It's trivial. It says nobody other theories need deny. And in fact, that was one of what triggered my investigation. Why do people say it says nothing other theories need deny? That appears that, okay, every theory is compatible with it. So they're admitting the things correspond, and that's what minimalist does, right? So why are they, in a way, underplaying the importance of assuming this correspondence? Aren't they just saying, yeah, there is correspondence, but let's talk about something else more important? And I think that's my assessment. Yeah, they think there are other things more important, and yeah, go do that, doing good things. Just don't think that it reflects back on is there or isn't there a relation to reality. That's, yeah.
Okay, thanks, Valdi, for your presentation. My question is about your conclusions. So could you please just put them up? Yeah, so, if I understood you correctly, these are rather on a higher level of generality than these particular issues which have been now discussed here. So I wonder whether you would say this is the case typical in philosophy, that it's possible to reach consensus on some higher level, even though there's a lot of conflict and dispute on more sort of details. So I'm just asking your experience as a philosopher.
My answer would be no, and then I'm comparing to, let's say, the philosophy of time, causation in particular, perhaps properties, where I do see the same vacillation between, the concept of a property and properties, right, and so on. They're all, for instance, perhaps also in the philosophy of causation, where it's very clear that some are offering theories about our understanding causal claims, others are about how we think about it, and so on, and even think about it in different domains in science, and okay. But all of that is kind of mixed together. But I don't see sorting that in a way. When we make clear what we're talking about, that doesn't make the dispute go away. And I'm in fact surprised maybe that I find that it's relatively easy to make the dispute go away in truth, but not in other disputes, okay? And maybe that's because I think implicitly people are operating in these other disputes with these distinctions. But yeah, so I wouldn't say that there is no awareness of it. I think there's plenty of awareness of it. It's just so rarely spelled out, right? So at least for someone reading the books, it's difficult. You have to really think hard to figure out, are they talking about the concept, the word, the claims, in what domain of thinking and so on. And we should do better on that account as philosophers, I think. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, Valdi.